Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's special event. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I started the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint to raise awareness about the use of restraint and seclusion in schools across our nation. Our mission is to educate the public and connect people who are dedicated to changing minds, laws, policies, and practices so that restraint and seclusion are reduced and eliminated from schools across the nation and beyond. Our vision is really to see safer schools for students, teachers, and staff. Today, I'm very excited to have with us Illinois State Representative Jonathan Carroll, who's going to be joining us for a special interview. Today's event is a pre-recorded event. This is a pre-recorded interview, which you'll be able to listen to later on Facebook, YouTube, or as an audio podcast. The interview took place on Thursday, October 1st, and we will be airing it about a week later. Before I introduce our guests today, I want to begin by introducing our co-hosts. Today we have as a co-host Jennifer Rowe. Jennifer is an autistic artist and accidental activist. She is a distinguished pastelist, art teacher, and research enthusiast. In her spare time, she likes spending time in nature and taking day trips to the ocean with her husband and 2 children. Jennifer is also a contributing author to both Neuroclastic and the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. In fact, you may have read the article she wrote about ending prone restraint in Illinois. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Really excited to have you co-hosting today. So I'm going to go ahead and add Representative Carroll here to the conversation. And if you would be so kind to introduce Representative Carroll, that would be great.
Sure. So glad you're here, Representative Carroll. Jonathan Carroll is serving his 2nd term as a state representative for Illinois' 57th House District. He decided to serve because the representative cares about his community. Jonathan wants to ensure that his children see the better side of politics and learn to love the state as much as he does. In addition to his work as state representative, Jonathan helps individuals with various cognitive challenges like ADHD meet personal, professional, and educational goals. As a certified special education teacher, Jonathan has been helping individuals his whole career. The representative is a lifelong resident of Illinois. Jonathan's passions reflect the community, creating jobs, reducing Illinois' massive property tax burden, ensuring great schools, sensible gun control, consolidating redundant layers of government, and protecting a woman's right to choose. Jonathan received a BA in Communications from DePaul University in Chicago and a MA in Learning Disabilities from Northeastern Illinois University in Chicago. Jonathan lives with his wife, Katrina, and 2 children in Northbrook, Illinois.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Representative Carroll, for joining us today. We're really excited to have you on. Really appreciate all the work that you've been doing there in Illinois. This is an issue that, as you probably know, is very near and dear to our hearts in terms of encouraging change. So thank you and welcome today.
Thank you. And you know, it's near and dear to my heart too. I think that and thank you for that introduction. I certainly am someone who's had experience with this myself. I think I shared you know, my narrative with people as a way of saying, like, this is actually a real thing, and the effects of this aren't just something that we see, you know, on a level that just affects children. The people that have dealt with this for years continually still see the effects of it. So it's not one of these situations where it just goes away after the short term. The scars of these acts and the things that people do last a long time. And so I think that when you're able to humanize something, I think when people could say, like, you know, there's an effect from this type of situation, I think it then adds to the way that you can help the process. So I've heard from a lot of advocates in this area. It's been great because I think it's been really helpful. People kind of sort of set a trend where people were like, you know what, this happened to me too. And, you know, I heard from kids I went to school with when I came out saying, like, thank you for doing this, you know, for all these years. Restraint, isolation, timeout was something that haunted us. So, you know, it's good to show the world that we live lives too, and that, you know, we're flawed, we're not perfect, we've dealt with these things, and it kind of helped my colleagues sort of see that. Now,
absolutely,
the sad reality of this is that there are schools that in Illinois here are fighting me on this legislation, and it's become very irritating to me because you know, I'm not a guy that's going to try to force anything upon anybody. I mean, I think that we want this legislation to be done and done right.
Right.
The problem is that I'm dealing with just elements of people that are schools that use this practice, that are private schools that charge a lot of money for tuition, that, you know, don't want to change what they do.
Sure.
I'm also dealing with the school administrators in Illinois that you know, never want to see change, or make they say like, oh, we're against this, but then when you work on legislation, all of a sudden the story changes. So it's really a very, this has been a lot, you know, this has been awakening. This has been, you know, been great for me from a standpoint of, you know, really kind of finally having some closure to some dark chapters of my life. It's also been frustrating because it's like, you know, you deal with these schools and the people that are around this practice, and they're just total callousness to like what this really does to impact people, and the amount of BS they put out there about what my intentions are with this bill. Right. You know, here's a good example. Like, you know, I understand that kids on the spectrum benefit from being able to you know, to isolate from a standpoint of recalibration of you know, of like emotional needs, like to get themselves back on an emotional plane. That's a voluntary act. That's a voluntary activity. They're not being thrown into a room saying, okay, get yourself regulated again. Right. It's a choice that they make, and it's an effective therapy for kids with autism. Sure. Some of the players are saying, like, well, Carroll wants to end all that. I'm like, no, that's not true.
I've been through the same as I was trying to implement change that people would look at that way.
So, you know, we're dealing with that part of it. You know, I don't think the pandemic helped me as much.
Right.
It's been exceptionally frustrating because, you know, a lot of us have legislative priorities. This was certainly mine, along with my colleague, Senator Gillespie. We've been working on this. We set a call about this yesterday. We're having calls about this. You know, we're fighting a lot more battles than I thought we would fight.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't think these people realize they picked a fight with the wrong guy. So, you know, if you follow me on social media, or if you see what I say, is I don't mince words, and I've not minced words about this from day one. And, you know, I've ruffled some feathers, but you know what? It's either go big or go home.
Absolutely.
And it's like, if we're not going to fight this battle, then why are we here?
Sure. Well, as we get into some questions here, I wanted to have Jennifer give a little bit of background on this, because while some of our viewers and listeners might be familiar with the Illinois story, and I hope that many of them are, we want to give a little bit of background, and then we'll get into some questions for you. And I appreciate and feel your passion. I'm sitting here today because my son was restrained and secluded inappropriately in a Maryland school, and after I realized what was going on in the scope of it, I knew something had to change, and I made a promise to him that I would do whatever I could to help make that change. So I absolutely value and appreciate your passion for this, and even through your experience as well. Jennifer, if you could give a little bit of background for our viewers that might not be familiar with what was happening in Illinois, that would be fantastic. And then we'll jump into some questions.
Sure. Back in November, an investigation by ProPublica and Chicago Tribune exposed what seclusion and restraint is like for students in Illinois public schools. Over a period of a school year and a half, 1,300 students were subjected to prone restraint in the school system there. As you likely know, prone restraint is when a person's held face down on the ground, just as was done to Max Benson, George Floyd, Cornelius Fredrick, and a number of other children and adults who have also lost their lives from this practice. It's recorded that 30 Illinois students complained, "I can't breathe" during a restraint. One student said, "You're gonna get me dead." Over 24 times, an ambulance had to be called due to the severity of the injuries during a restraint. The US Department of Education has given guidance that prone restraint should never be used because they can cause serious injury or death. Even one physical restraint instance can result in traumatization. And the majority of students subjected to seclusion and restraint have behavioral or intellectual disabilities, brown and black students. The Illinois State Board of Education responded really quickly when the investigation was published in an article titled "Quiet Rooms." and emergency rooms were put into place, banning the use of seclusion and prone restraint. And there was great anticipation in the spring these would become law, but instead, in the spring, those both isolated seclusion and prone restraint became allowed again.
Okay, thanks. So with that background in mind, I just want to kind of dive into some questions here. Jonathan, one of the things that I learned about you as I was doing some research is I didn't realize that you were a certified special education teacher, which really to me kind of puts you in a very unique position in terms of really understanding the problem. I think sometimes people assume that, you know, as an elected representative that you might not really understand the problem, but certainly you have a far different perspective. So with that as your background, and I know you've got a personal story as well, but how did this issue really get on your radar in terms of, what was it from the Tribune story, or how did this really get on your radar now?
I mean, there was the Tribune story. I mean, I had no idea this was going on. It was just one of these things where it's like, you know, I assumed that as a 46-year-old male, some of the barbaric practices I dealt with as a kid were gone. Mm-hmm. Little did I know that that was actually not the case. And a lot of people got caught with their pants down on this one, you know, the Illinois State Board of Education, some others, because, you know, we had no idea to the extent it was happening. And I think that's one of the biggest, you know, one of the biggest challenges as a legislator is that, look, I don't know everything that's happening, and I don't know every bill number, and I don't know every piece of legislation. You know, the assumption is that we know, we don't. And so, but when we find out about something is when we can address it. So a lot of my job is a pound to cure, which is very frustrating because, again, it's like a lot of this stuff, if we could just address proactively, would probably help, you know, do a better job of it. So I was actually at a training in Tampa. I saw the article. One of my Senate sponsor happened to be the same thing too. I said, did you see this BS? And she said, yes. And I said, okay, let's get to work. And so literally on the back of a napkin, we started working on the legislation in Tampa and, you know, and continued doing it, you know, and you know, I had a few other colleagues of mine that initially expressed an interest in wanting to be that person, but when they saw what I would, they heard my narrative and understood why this is important to me. They all were like, okay, this is something that he should definitely take the lead on. So it was good. And that was, it's funny you should bring up the special ed part, because one of the jerks I was dealing with that was trying to fight me on the bill came out and said, how can Carroll talk about education when he knows nothing about education? I'm like, hi, I own a business that I'm still in practice helping kids with ADHD and executive functioning. I do special ed advocacy. I'm a certified special ed teacher. I'm like, so here's 3 areas where I have credibility in this area. Plus I was restrained, and plus I was put into isolation timeout. So I can speak from both it actually happening to me as a kid to my professional experience. So, you know, that's what weak arguments are, is that, okay, so we're just going to start questioning his credibility. Well, bring it on, because I'm happy to share my credentials and my experiences with anybody in this area. So that's part of it. So there's the discrediting of credit. And I think that part of it is great. So I love when people do that. Like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, really? Let me give you a long laundry list of why I do know what I'm talking about. And I mean, I had it out pretty well with the lobbyist from the school administrators. And she wrote me an email and said, oh, this is outrageous, but here's our concerns with the bill. And I said, based on what I'm reading here, you're for throwing kids on the ground and locking them in closets. And she's like, I never said that. I said, well, if you're fighting us on our legislation and you're not offering us solutions to this, that's what you're supporting. So, you know, again, you can tell I'm not shy. I mean, what I'm telling you is I've told every reporter, told my colleagues, I'll tell anybody is that don't come to me and tell me you're outraged by something and then try to kill it. Either you try to fix the problem or get the hell out of the way and let those of us that know what we're doing fix the problem. So, you know, and again, the unfortunate part of this situation is, I mean, I think it's just the world of 2020 is that, you know, we're not having a traditional legislative session. Right. We didn't have one in the spring. And when we did have a few days down there, I was actually in quarantine because I was exposed. So I wasn't able to be there. So I really couldn't work the bill. We're supposed to go back there around Thanksgiving for what we call veto session, but we don't really have anything to veto. So it might just be an extension of our other session. And the plan is to run the bill. And the hopes is that, you know, I can get, you know, my Senate sponsor can round up enough support in the Senate, which I think it's one of those bills where people may have cold feet, but you put that on the board and you say, okay, we're going to stop this practice. And I think that's when your conscience and your soul kicks in. And then, you know, and we go from there. But then what I also dealt with in the House is that I had again, we're in the supermajority. So I'm a Democrat. We're in the supermajority in Illinois. The Republican leader is in cahoots with one of the schools that does this. And he and another person on his leadership team. So when the rules changed, he meant the mentioning of what happened when the rules were kind of, manipulated back a little bit, was they worked behind the scenes to try to get this to what we call the Joint Council of like there's a group that meets that, like, sometimes you can work on emergency rules, and they were able to sneak that in the 11th hour before I even knew about it. And I mean, I lost my mind too. I mean, I got a call from the same Tribune reporters and basically threw all them under the bus. I'm like, because you know what we're working on here, and this was a very sneaky way that you did this. So there's people that don't want this to go away.
Right.
And it's unfortunately sad that the people that talk about how much they love kids and how much they love people and how much they want to help people, at the end of the day, don't.
Right.
And and you said it best. Like, I mean, and I brought this point up numerous times, is we're treating our children like we treat our worst criminals. We're treating our children like they've done something wrong.
Right.
Like, you're taking a kid that's in an emotional crisis and you're making them, you're holding them down, or you're putting them alone. Like, I know when I'm alone and I'm pissed or I'm in a bad place, I probably, being alone is not the safest thing for me.
Right.
It's actually quite the opposite. It's more of an adverse effect. So you're creating this system, and again, I think, look, it's the path of least resistance. Obviously, if you have a kid that's in crisis, you want to find a way to kind of diffuse the crisis as quickly as possible. That's not it.
Right.
And so it's like that's the part about this that's just so frustrating.
Sure.
The campaign of misinformation.
Right.
And the important part, the unfortunate part of the campaign of misinformation, that comes from the people that actually are the ones that are the bad players in this.
Right. So let me, Jennifer, I'm going to skip around a little bit in the questions here, because we're kind of covering a few things here. But one of the things that you mentioned, and I agree with you very heavily on, is that there are absolutely better ways to be working with kids. And we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years researching the better ways to work with kids. There is no benefit. There's no academic, there's no educational benefit, no therapeutic benefit to the use of restraint and seclusion. You mentioned before, hey, if a kid needs a self-directed break, yeah, absolutely. I've always supported that. If somebody wants to have a sensory room, but when you are putting someone in a room against their will, it is forceful. It is usually involving a restraint to get them there. So my question for you is, we hear the question a lot at the Alliance, and we have pretty good answers for it at this point. But the question is, what else do you expect us to do? We hear that frequently. And I'm just kind of curious what your response is in terms of how you think that, what you think schools should be doing. You have very unique perspective as somebody that was a special educator and has worked with a lot of children, because we do find that kids with autism and ADHD are certainly overrepresented in the kids that end up being restrained and secluded. So what are some of your responses to kind of the solutions question?
Well, we're dealing with the same issue that we dealt with like the George Floyd situation. We're dealing with a lot of African-American children that are overly, this method's overly used with as well. So it's like, you're almost creating the pipeline of what we're seeing from a young age on. And that's the sad reality of it is that we're almost training our children to be restrained. We're almost treating our children to be isolated. And especially in lower income minority communities, we're seeing this more. And, again, it's not a resource question. It's a conscience question. It's a soul question. Is this what we want to be question? And I think that it does come down to resources. I mean, I think there's look, at the end of the day, the challenge in my job or any legislator's job is, how the hell are we going to pay for it? I think that's always what you say. And it's again, while it's not a criticism, while it's not okay to do that, I think the only conversation I've heard where I kind of take that step back is around, well, what are we supposed to do? And I think that's a failure of our system, really, from the State Board of Education, is what are we supposed to do? Because again, it's like, you're following the guidance. We haven't banned that here in Illinois. So theoretically, they haven't broken any rules. Did they abuse the process? Absolutely. But it wasn't breaking the law. So we have, we have to kind of teach them how to fish. You know, give them a fishing rod, teach them how to fish, as opposed to just vilifying them and saying, like, you have to stop this. And I think that's the big disconnect that we're dealing with is, okay, so what's next? Again, I know there's programs out there that they say that are effective, and they certainly, you know, again, I've read about them. I know there's a program out of Virginia that does some great stuff. I'm drawing a blank on the name.
Carroll.
Yes. Yep. So, you know, I know these programs that do these things, and again, the data on them is great. That stuff is great, but they're expensive. And again, I don't put a price on what we do with our children, but the reality of it is, and especially in a COVID world, when we're already our resources are less and less now, how do we get those programs into the schools to help with that? And that's going to take, that's the piece of it that I think that I have to work with the governor's office on, that I have to work with the State Board of Education on, potentially seeking, you know, maybe outside, you know, people to help facilitate this, trying to maybe setting up foundations and things. You know, one of the things that our governor in Illinois is, you know, I mean, our governor is J.B. Pritzker. He's, you know, he's a billionaire, but he does a lot of philanthropy work. He's done a lot of things, like even around COVID, like he helped set up a foundation that raised millions of dollars to help families with COVID. Like this was separate of the state. This is something that he put his sister in charge of running. And it was, you know, and so he has an ability to kind of do stuff like that. He's just got great connections in the community. And I think if we can get some of the community leaders together, we could probably pull together more resources on this. But that's our biggest challenge.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting because you mentioned a couple things that really tie together. One, of course, is the school to prison pipeline. And we know that these disproportionate policies of suspension, expulsion, restraint, seclusion are leading kids down that road, are leading kids. You know, one suspension has a tremendous impact on whether or not a kid will graduate. And, you know, when we think about cost, I think sometimes we think short term, but certainly the cost of incarceration, the cost of lost lives is tremendous. And, you know, if we can get people to focus on, you know, some of these solutions cost money, but the damage, the trauma, the incarceration, it seems like it should be a compelling argument to do the right thing.
100% agree with you. And again, let me be clear. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination putting the health and safety of anybody.
Right.
And I also think that you're right. I mean, the problem is we do pounds of cure. Like we spend a bunch of money to throw people in jail. Right. We spend a bunch of money to disproportionately put people in jail. And if we would invest some of that money that we spend on petty crimes that produce large sentences from minority individuals and invest that back in the schools, that would be great. Like here's a good one for you. The number one mental health care provider in Cook County. So I live in Cook County, which is the Chicago area, is Cook County Jail, is the number one mental health provider in Cook County. I want you to hear what I just said. The number one mental health provider is the Cook County Jail. That is 57,000 pounds of cure. Right. Not an ounce of prevention. Right. And so, you know, that whole thing is, and you know, and we just, I'll give you kind of I'm going to go off on a little bit of a here, but so you'll understand this. We have some great legislators that have really worked on the justice reform issues. And so earlier this year or last year, we legalized marijuana in Illinois. And one of the reasons why I thought it was a great idea is because we were able to throw in there a social justice component and really trying to get some minority kids that were locked up for petty marijuana crimes out, because I think that was, you know, a way that we were able to find, just another way we could find to incarcerate minority children. So we have that concept, and I think that again is another conversation to have with my colleagues. Certainly, is look, if you guys have a way that we can take what we're spending to jail someone and take that resource and apply it to early education, bettering the process early, I think we'll see results from that. But absolutely. You know, again, it's like, but you know, we also are elected officials, and people like seeing people thrown in jail better than education, which is, to me, is absolutely just mind-boggling.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna backtrack just a little bit. You had mentioned how the money is a big factor for people not wanting to, anticipating this going to cost money for training for UCARO or other methods for crisis management, new trainings. So I guess I'm wondering, you know, we know that there were objections at the 11th hour. One of those objections was training was going to it'd take time to train. Another objection was it's going to be a burden to our social workers, our staff to debrief after every incident, to meet with family and students, staff workers to find triggers. I would like to know what would your resolution, what would your solution be to those objections that have been listed as, why people have at the 11th hour groups have decided that they're not actually in favor of the ban of isolated seclusion and restraint?
That's a great question. So let me answer that for you a couple of different ways. There's a saying in politics that I kind of moved it around a little bit, is I don't really care how the sausage is made, I care how the sausage tastes. And so for me, it's like, I don't really want to see how the sausage is made. I don't think any of us do. But the point is that if these groups my goal is to end this practice. Okay. That's my goal. If you have a better path for us to get there, I'm all ears. I'm like, listen, I don't have all the answers, but what I'm saying is, come to me with a process or resolution that's going to end this barbaric practice, and we'll work on the rest of it. And what I haven't seen from the opposition is their plan on how to do it. Because they'll talk about how outraged they are and how horrible this is, and God, this is the worst thing in the world. But it's crocodile tears, because it's like, I don't see a plan. I don't have legislation that they've drafted. There's nothing that they've given me that tells me that they're serious about this. And so from my standpoint, I'm like, look, I am open to suggestions. I mean, we've amended this bill several times to try to get people, on the same page. Again, my Senate sponsor and I I originally wanted to run the bill as is, put it on the board and say, look, vote against this bill and you're for doing these things. And at the end of the day, while it steals headlines and makes me feel good, it's not the way that any of us should ever do anything. Like, we should work with people and try to get a bill together that's going to accomplish what we need to accomplish. But the reality of it is the opposition has opposed the bill, but hasn't done much to help me write a better one. So that's where your point is very valid, Jennifer, is that I think it's like, they oppose it, but they don't do anything else with it. And one of my emails to one of the opposition was, okay, where's your bill? Where's your bill? Where's your language? Where's your bill?
Yeah.
Stop telling me you don't like mine. Where's your bill? Because here's the bottom line. I'm going after this, and it's going to happen. And either you're going to be on my team, or I'm going to leave you in the dust. And when she brings up, like, why I told them my opposition, I'll say, well, I also asked her for different language in the bill, and she never provided it for me. So you know what? Here's the thing. And this is kind of good. Is sort of, I'll give you sort of a little bit of a civics lesson here. And I'm sorry, I know I'm rambling on and on, but here's a good civics lesson for things, is that, in any situation legislatively, you just can't walk into a room and say, you know what, this is the way it's going to be, and it's the end of story. I mean, it's an impossible process, and it's going to make you very unpopular with your peers, and it's going to make you an ineffective legislator. You have to find ways of working with people. And so I think that one of the challenges that we face is that a lot of legislators, it takes time for us to learn that lesson, is like, you know what, you need to actually talk to your colleagues on both sides of the aisle. You need to work with them to come to a consensus to try to get something done. Now, again, there will be respectful disagreement. And at a certain point, you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to do this. And if you don't want to vote for it, speak out against it and don't vote for it. But you want to at least give them the time to do that. And most of the time, people are pretty receptive to that and will say what their ideas are. And you may disagree with them, but at least they have the opportunity to present an alternative perspective. What's happened with the opposition in our case is their opposition are to aspects of the bill that take away the teeth of the bill, which would mean then this practice is still going to go on. Like, then we're just writing a piece of paper with words on it. And that's my issue. So you can oppose a part of the bill, but give me a solution that gets us to that point, that allows us to do the practice. And I think that's one of the things with us legislators is, and for anyone who's listening, if you ever want to contact your legislator, don't be critical, be critical and suggestive. In other words, I don't like what you're doing. This is how I would do it instead. And I think you get a lot further than that. I get emails all the time, like, you suck at your job. And I say, listen, I say to my wife, please don't email me. I'm kidding. It's but no, but in all seriousness, like, you get emails from people that criticize you. It's like, okay, then, but what's your idea?
Right.
What's your solution? And if you think that you can do a better job, why don't you run for office and put out your ideas? And look, I mean, that's why we have an election process. So for me, it's like, offer solutions, offer suggestions, try to work with us. And I think you get a lot further than that. And I think that's where the problem in all this has really happened, is that they've just come in like, your idea stinks. Right. And you know what? And then I go back to there's a certain point where I'm like, you know what? I'm running the bill. You get your opposition to it. I'll get my supporters of it. I'm running the bill. And if they want to vote no on it, that's their choice. But I think I can get to 60 votes because I think I have enough people in my chamber who respect the fact that what I'm doing is for the right reasons. And I've earned trust of colleagues on both sides of the aisle because they know I'm not going to screw them over, and that my efforts have always been in the right place.
Yeah, that question, Jennifer, was really interesting. And I think one of the interesting things about it for me is that, I'm very sensitive to the fact that it takes time to get training. We're very supportive of teachers, administrators, staff, and realize this is a process. The other argument, though, I had a little bit more difficulty with, which was that it would be too much of a burden on staff and social workers. And I guess the difficulty I had was that to a degree, and this is my opinion here, but to a degree, we want people really to be, if they're going to use any kind of restraint, we want them to be very thoughtful about using it. We want it to be a measure of last resort. If it's truly a measure of last resort, you shouldn't be having a burden of doing this. I live in a state that has fairly strong laws, and despite the strong laws, we find that it's being overused. We have the imminent serious physical harm standard, which basically is a life or death type of standard, and yet we find it used for noncompliance, disrespect, minor behaviors. So yeah, to some degree, I'm not as sympathetic to the burden on staff and social workers, meaning that we want it to be something that you're really not going to as a first resort. Not to say that the staffs, the schools don't need the proper resources, but we also want to be very judicious in using anything like this because the impact is so great.
100% agree with you. And again, that's my thing too. Is like, I don't really care about the burden. Like, I mean, this is stop throwing kids on the ground, stop walking.
Right.
There's a certain level of the burden where I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's not certainly, our intention, but I think we also have to be, cognizant and certainly understanding that, that some of these teachers are dealing with an exceptionally difficult population of kids, right? That are, that require a lot of patience and love and all those things. And the sad reality is, look, we're human. Look, I love my children more than anything in the world. I mean, I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, but they piss me off sometimes. I mean, they're kids. And so do I like to yell at them? No. Does it happen sometimes? Yes. I mean, obviously I feel bad about it, but when they make a mistake, I get upset. And, take that as a teacher where you're dealing with a room full of 20 kids that are challenging to you. And you look, you're human. It's going to happen. But again, it's back to the ounce of prevention. What skills and strategies what things are we providing our teachers and our schools and everybody else with? And how do we do that? And the other thing too is, look, we in Illinois passed a law that says we're going to have a minimum teacher salary of starting salary of $40,000 a year, with the goals of trying to attract better talent in the classroom, trying to attract, but not that the teachers we have are bad. I'm not throwing any teachers under the bus, but we've had a real problem attracting teachers. I mean, it's just not a field that people are going to right now. And so we need to attract better teachers, and we need to if you attract better talent, you'll attract better people that can work through some of these challenges that they have. So I'm excited about that. And again, I think it comes back to let's work on the training. Is it a conversation with our collaborative universities where we say, look, what are the things that we should be teaching your staff while they're learning education? People going into special ed, what are some things that we can teach them that are diffusing, or I should say de-escalating practices, as opposed to, okay, your first response is go in that room, lock the door, calm down, I'll come get you in 15 minutes. And that type of situation. So for me, it's like that's the challenge we have. I mean, I think the first thing is I want to lay a foundation that we're going to say, look, this practice is going to end. Now let's build the house around it and have the things that the house needs to make sure that we're doing the best thing that we can for these kids.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
You mentioned a little earlier about misinformation. And when we spoke in the interview some months ago, you mentioned that we need to put an end to this campaign of misinformation. I guess I was just would like to hear, can you give us some more specifics about the type of misinformation that you're seeing out there that that you're referring to, and who all is propagating it?
Well, I mean, I think it's a few different areas. I mean, I think one is that there's some private schools that look that this is their bread and butter. I mean, I don't think their bread and butter is like using the practice, but it's a practice they use in their day to day. And they charge a lot of money for what they do, and they are this is you're asking basically it's like asking McDonald's to serve hot dogs instead of hamburgers. I mean, you're asking them to change sort of a fundamental practice that they have. Not that it's right, or not that it's right, because it's certainly not, but it's the reality of the situation. So they've hired some pretty powerful attorneys to work with them on this issue. And I can get into that another day. That one of the attorneys they hired, I think, is a direct conflict because he represents both parents and schools. So I don't need. I mean, so. I guess there's no honor amongst thieves, but we'll go back to that.
And there's some legislators who are board members of one of the giants, and co-chair of the joint. I'm gonna get it wrong. Joint committee. Sorry.
Yeah, JCAR. What's called JCAR.
Yeah, I'm using that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they put a lot of people on that board as honorary members who, and one of them is also the Republican spokesman, the Republican leader. So yes, they've done things like that where and let me be clear. I don't think that any of the people that we're talking about or insinuating have sinister intentions. I want to be very clear. Like I'm not trying to throw my colleagues under the bus. I just don't think they understand the issue. And I think that they've had somebody else in their ear for a while on it. So I'm coming along now and they're like, whoa. You don't know what you're talking about. Sort of like the people that question my credibility. And again, in a non-COVID world, I would have been spending hours with them in their office, explaining to them why this is what I'm trying to do. The unfortunate reality of it is I have not had the chance to do that. I mean, I work well with my colleagues. Again, I'm not the guy that just because I'm disappointed in what they're doing doesn't mean that I don't think that they're evil people. But at the same time, we have to be cognizant of the fact that they've had someone in their ear and I haven't had a chance to be that person in their ear. So, and I'll give you an example. Like before we did our call, I was on the phone with one of my Republican colleagues who is getting pressure from his side because he signed on as a sponsor of my bill, and is getting some pressure from his side to sort of, because they know we have a good relationship, to kind of, talk to me about this. And, I think as I explained to him, like, look, I'm willing to work with people on this, but there's a certain level of, I just can't give on that issue because that takes away the intent of the bill. And he says to me, he's like, I fully trust you. He says, I don't think that you would try to screw anyone over. He says, I don't think that you'd put anyone in a bad position. He says, but understand there's people on my side who aren't with you on this. And I said, well, that's their choice. But I said, I think there's a certain level of, I will present a bill that I hope gets us to the ending of this practice. And I'm happy to answer any questions on it. And if your colleagues feel that this bill is not something they're comfortable voting for, then don't vote for it. And if they do, then vote for it. But that's my thing, is like, look, at the end of the day, that's why we have a red button that says no and a green button that says yes. And you hit one or the other, and that's the end of it. Look, you have to live with your votes. Trust me, I've taken votes where people have been like, I can't believe you voted for that. Well, it's the way of the world.
Right. Well, kind of on that vein of kind of misinformation, it's my understanding that some of the schools were actively encouraging parents to write letters supporting keeping prone restraint and seclusion. And in fact, I've even talked to one such parent, and the schools were actually leading the parents to believe that they needed these, and I'm doing air quotes here, tools to support their children, and even threatening to send kids home or call the police. I know there was one person interviewed for one of the articles that said that the day after this went into effect as the emergency ban, the school called and said, we think your child is going to escalate, so we're going to need you to pick him up. So it's understandable that parents would have concerns, and it's misinformation. I've been working on this for a couple of years now, and looked into the alternatives. I mean, there's trauma-informed approaches, there's UCARU, there's neurosequential model, there's collaborative proactive solutions. There's a lot of ways better ways to work with kids. But sometimes schools get stuck in culture and stuck with what they're doing. But it really is concerning because they then kind of make this false choice that, well, gee, either we have these tools and we lovingly restrain and seclude your children, or we're going to call the police. Why do you think that schools are taking that kind of position?
I think for the reasons that we discussed. I think it's just one of these situations where you're going to deal with families that are. It's again, the campaign of misinformation. It's the look what these people are trying to do to us. They don't want to educate your kids. Well, no, that's not it at all. So it's like, again, it's like you create these campaigns of misinformation, and that's how you approach this. And I've heard from some families too that wrote me, and what they were doing is they were really talking to some of my colleagues in the area, and I was getting calls from my really even liberal colleagues who are like, whoa. I'm like, and then I explained to them what's going on. They're like, oh yeah, that makes more sense. Right. So obviously, look, we're dealing, not to make this about national politics, but we saw that in that poop show of a debate the other night where basically they didn't even talk about issues. They just yelled at each other for 2 hours. So it's like, you can create diversions to get away from the actual topics at hand. So I think that's sort of what they were doing is, again, it's like, I love when I get an email from someone who doesn't even live within 200 miles of my district telling me how if I support this legislation, they're not going to vote for me and they're going to tell all their friends not to vote for me. And I'm like, I think I'll take that chance. But it's like, but at the same time as it's like, but that's what they do. They'll write, the thing that's amazing is, and this is also some advice for everyone listening to us. We're human too. Like, you write me an email, call me all kinds of names and stuff. I'm like, first of all, I'll be like, go to hell. But second of all, I'm going to be like, you know what? Yeah, I already tuned you out because I'm like, you don't know me, you don't know my positions, and you make assumptions, and I'm tired of it. So I think when you're desperate, you seek other people to help you through your desperation. Right. And I think that's what these schools are doing. And again, a lot of the parents just don't know. Like, well, listen, Johnny comes home from Giant Steps and he's had a great day. Right. So I don't want that to stop. And Giant Steps says, well, we may have to close our doors if this bill passes. Oh, whoa. No.
Yeah. Well, and
they do.
Yeah, and I feel bad for the parents. I feel bad for the parents that are put in this position. I had a conversation with somebody recently, and I asked the question, which I think is a really important question, because we know that restraint and seclusion lead to trauma and injury, not just of the students, but the teachers, of the staff. We know kids have died due to this, so we know they're high risk. And my question was just, if there was something else that we could do to reduce the risk and keep everybody safe, would you want to do that? And I don't know how you could answer that anything other than yes, of course I'd want to reduce the risk. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about finding alternatives to work with kids in a safer way.
Right. Exactly. No, I think you're right. And again, I think that's again is just educating yourself on the issue and understand there's a second side to it. And look, again, let me be clear. It's like, look, if you don't agree with what I'm trying to do, that's okay. It's not okay, but it's, you're entitled to your opinion. And again, elections have consequences, and we certainly understand that. People have sort of have these thoughts that, again, the bills and stuff that we work on, it's like, that you were not agreeable to changes and stuff like that. So they come at us with that aggression, and it's like, look, it's like, let's work through the process. So I think this has been a really interesting few months on this bill. I will tell you that.
All right, Jennifer.
So I was, so back in April, the Illinois State Board of Education negotiated with the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, JCAR, to allow schools to use the parental restraint for 1 more year, and then to aim to phase it out by July 2021. What do you anticipate will happen if a ban on seclusion and restraint doesn't become law in this veto session coming up in November? We're phasing it out.
I think I think that ISB, the State Board of Education, And the senator and I are going to have to work on this together. The State Board of Education has told me that they are interested in ending these practices too. Governors expressed that interest as well. When I came out
publicly,
with my
even, yes,
called me that afternoon and expressed his full support of ending these practices. So
right.
I have a supportive administration on this one. So my guess is that the State Board of Education may get involved with this because they've told me as much. There's other cards we can certainly play on this. I'm running unopposed, which I hear is better than running opposed. So they're going to be stuck with me for 2 more years. So look, if the bill doesn't go through this veto session, I have 2 more years to work on the legislation. So it's one of those things where we have a lot of avenues to get this done. The problem is, again, especially in the COVID world, we were already pushing one big boulder up a hill. Now we got 5 to push up a hill. So it's just, the amount of bandwidth that we have. And again, this is an important issue, but I think that, now obviously that our society is essentially shut down and people aren't able to function in a standard way. It's created different challenges. And that's the real problem. Like, look, as a legislator, it's very frustrating for me because I had some real strong legislative priorities that I really wanted to get done. Like I had some stuff that I really, really, really wanted to get done. And now I can't because of the COVID world.
Yeah, I'm sure that's got to be difficult. We saw that here in Maryland as well. We actually were trying to push forward a bill last term related to restraint and seclusion and our data reporting efforts. And it seems like just about everything got kind of held in place there. What do you think, in terms of getting the votes that you need to get this in place, what do you think the biggest barriers are at this point, or do you feel pretty confident in getting the votes to do it?
I think I have the votes. I think I can get to 60 votes. I think there's enough people that, again, would trust me in the process on this. Whether the bill gets called or not is a whole other conversation. I have a good relationship with leadership. I have a good relationship on those things. And if I went in there and said, I want to run this, I will. Obviously I want to make sure I have the votes because that bill doesn't pass. Then I look like a completely incompetent person. So I want to make sure that it's like being an attorney. You don't ask a question that you don't know the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
So, I need to make sure that when I call the bill, I'm going to have the votes that I need.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of it, is doing a roll call, making sure I have the votes, going to the speaker and saying, look, I'd like to call my bill. I have the support of the caucus and I have the support of at least 60 legislators. And so I think that's at least one of those things that honestly, that's the part about this process I'm worried the least about is just getting it to the floor.
Right.
Everything else is kind of look, the opposition is going to start rounding up their people, and I already know the vocal critics are going to come out against my bill, and that's fine. I'm willing to take whatever they have to say, and we'll deal with it. But honestly, it's one of those situations where at the end of the day, I'm going to put a bill on the board that's going to make kids safer, and if you want to hit that no button, well, that's on your conscience.
Mm-hmm.
That's your decision. But I think there's a certain point where we have to start putting our cards on the table. Like, is this something you're going to support or not support?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. What are your recommendations for concerned citizens? What can they do to help influence a ban of seclusion and restraint in Illinois, whether the citizens are Illinois residents or across the nation?
I think it's just, connecting with the advocacy groups like this. I think this is certainly one place you can start, educating yourself on who your legislators are. This is another thing too. And I think this is one of the challenges in politics. And it's really, the bottom line is all politics is local. At the end of the day, your school boards, your village boards, your park district boards, all those boards have so much more of an impact on the day-to-day lives than, let's say, Donald Trump or your states or your U.S. senators or your congressmen or your state officials have. Again, there's certain things that I do, but my day-to-day in your life is probably not as much as your school board people. So that's, I think, where you start is really the grassroots route of it. Look, if you want to if you want to be a solution to the problem, run for office. Like, if you think that you have something that you think that you can fix, then I would highly recommend it. It's funny when people actually come out strongly against me, I actually encourage them to run against me. I'm like, well, you've got such great ideas and you think you can do this job better than I can, run. Petition season starts in the fall. Go print your petitions, go get your signatures and run. And you'll run on your platform and I'll run on my platform. And if you're a better choice for the district, then you'll win and I'll lose. And that's the process of elections for me, is that, look, it's like every election has a consequence or doesn't have a consequence. And honestly, like, as much as I disagree with everything Donald Trump says, he did say in the debate, the first thing he said is elections have consequences. That those are his words, not mine. So, that if you vote for, ask your school board members, hey, listen, you want to run for school board? What do you think of seclusion and timeout? What do you think the school district should do? These are things you should ask, because nobody pays attention to these local races. And they are so important. Like, I gotta tell you, like, who makes up your school board, who makes up your village board, those are the things you need to be looked at on a day-to-day basis. Because it's like, absolutely, where's this district going? And I think that's the thing. Is like, look, I can file a bill and it's great and it's going to be helpful, but have that conversation. Go to the root of the problem. Don't come to me. Like, go to your school board.
Right. Yeah, that actually mimics my story of making change locally after what happened to my son. I work with a local school board, and we were able to change the policy and get in new training. And so I've always said to people, locally first, you're going to have the quickest impact locally. You can then go to a state level or federal level, but you can do a lot very quickly on the local level if you're able to work with people. Jennifer, I know in addition to writing a couple stories about this issue, you also put together an online petition. You want to tell us a little bit more about that and where people can find that?
Sure. The petition is change.org. It's titled "Ask Superintendent Ayala and Governor Pritzker to End Prone Restraint in Illinois Schools." So please let's see where to find it. You can find it it's linked from both the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint and Neuroclastic Facebook pages. And you can also just go to the URL http://bit.ly/ILL and sign. Be sure to share with friends, family, your school systems. And if you're an organization, political figure, notable figure, you can actually just send me an email. It's linked in that petition, and you can be added to the organizers and influencers list. Among that list currently are Autistic Self-Advocacy Network and Black Lives Matter 757. So
great.
Hopefully we can get this is a way for individuals just to be able to speak out for the safety of the children in Illinois public schools.
Absolutely. Great. Well, listen, we are just about at time here, and Representative Carroll, really appreciate the fact that you made that decision to run. That's great advice, and I appreciate that you're advocating for the things that are important to you, of which I can tell you that this is very important to many people out there. As the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, we've been doing a lot of research in this area. If there's ever anything we can do, we have connections with, people that offer alternatives like Carroll and Collaborative Proactive Solutions. If we can ever help out in any way, please don't hesitate. But thank you so much for all that you're doing and impacting change. We really appreciate you taking time to talk to us today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And you take care.
You too.
Bye-bye. All right, so let me tell you about what we have coming up here. We've got another live event coming up in another 2 weeks. Of course, this is being broadcast. This was pre-recorded and being broadcast from there, but we have another live event coming up in 2 more weeks. We're going to be talking to Diane Gould, and let me pull that up here real quick. Diane is going to be talking about There Has to Be a Better Way, Reimagining Behavioral Support. So we're really looking forward to that. We've got more great stuff coming up. Want to thank you all for joining in with us today and hope to see you again really soon. So thank